All right, without further ado, so let me do the introduction. So welcome everybody. This is the Dissertation Power Hour. We're going to go over
APA.
Take two. Hi everybody, we're going to go over the Dissertation Power Hour. This is the dissertation workshop for APA. What does APA stand for? American Psychological Association. And today's presenter is our own wonderful tutor down here in San Diego, the amazing Emily Roberts-Parker. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and please hold your applause to the end. But Emily, it's all yours.
All right, welcome everybody. So again, this is the APA dissertation workshop. We're going to review basics of APA, and then we're also going to review specifically how you can apply this to your dissertation. If you have further questions after reviewing this PowerPoint and this recording, feel free to email me. My email is on this slide right here, eroberts@alliant.edu, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. All right. Okay, so most of you will probably know this, but in case you don't, this is just a general overview of what is APA style. So again, the American Psychological Association is really most commonly used for stylistics, in-text citations, and references, and for all of your dissertations, this should be the style that you're using.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's MLA?
MLA is a format that is typically more used in undergraduate. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with it. It's not super different, but there's a lot of really small differences, so remember to use APA when your teachers ask for it. Typically in graduate school, they won't ask for MLA formatting.
Okay, thank you.
So, in general, your dissertation should really include 12-point font always and Times New Roman. It should always be double-spaced. There's a couple instances where it shouldn't be double-spaced, and we'll get to that later. The whole thing should have 1-inch margins, and the whole thing should be printed and on print screen on that 8.5 × 11 paper. Okay, so looking at overall the sections of your dissertation, what you want it to include. So you always want it to have a title page, and we'll go over what that looks like next. You want it to then have a copyright page. You can have a dedication or acknowledgement section. This is really optional if you really want to dedicate your dissertation or acknowledge certain people. Then you're always going to have a table of contents, and we have examples of this later. Then you're going to have, this is also optional, a list of tables and figures. Then your abstract, the main body of your dissertation, and this is going to be your 4 or 5 chapter model, which we'll go over. Then your references, then your appendices, and then sometimes people have even more supplemental material like a curriculum vitae, CV, but that is not super common. So that is a nice kind of overview. Might be a little intimidating of everything that's needed, but I think it makes it a little less intimidating to see it all in order. So now breaking down the different chapter models, this is going to be a little bit different if you're doing quantitative or qualitative and what your chair requires you to do in your dissertation. But here's the basic different chapter model. So in the 4-chapter model, chapter 1 is typically the introduction and literature review, chapter 2 is the method, chapter 3 is the results, and chapter 4 is the discussion or discussion and conclusion. In the 5-chapter model, you're doing introduction, literature review, methods, results, and then discussion. So just slightly different. Ask your chair what they prefer for the chapter models. So this is an outline of your title page. So this is typically the first page that you're going to see in a dissertation. And at the top here, this is just an example. We're seeing a title, and it's all in bold, it's all caps. And then we're seeing right under that the dissertation presented to the faculty, and then it's going to be your school's name, Alliant, the location, and then it's always going to say impartial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Psychology by your name, comma, your credentials, and then it's approved by your chair, your reader, and then your outside reader. Some of you may have more committee members as well. So this is sort of the basics of the title page. Going back to really general APA formatting here, so that title page, this is referring to also not only dissertations but essays in general when talking about APA formatting. You always want to include a page header, and you can do that when you're on Word by double-clicking on the very top of your page. And your header is going to be in the upper left, and the first page always says running head, and it's really important that the R is capitalized and the H is lowercase, and then colon, and then, for example, if my paper's name was body image, that would be all in bold and caps, or not bold, I'm sorry, just all in caps. Remember that the running head cannot exceed 50 characters, even with spaces. So again, below is another example of running head, title of your paper. Right here, this next bullet point is referring to the actual dissertation, where you want the title in the center, all in caps, in the upper half of the page. We just saw an example of that. The name, the university name, and then every other page should include the page header, but it's not going to say running head anymore. It's just going to say the title, upper left, title all in caps, and the page number on the right-hand side, upper right. And we'll go over more consistently what page numbers will look like later. So right here. So this is an example of a table of contents. So it's really important to know that everything before chapter 1, or the beginning of the really body of the dissertation, is Roman numerals, and then everything after that is numbers. This is how they decide to split that up. So remember that when you're making your table of contents to break it up that way. This also shows us different ways of doing the headings. If you look under chapter 1, title of chapter 1, it shows us that, for example, if when we're in chapter 1, the next idea we would tab in once. If the next idea is under the first idea, we tab it in again, and then if it's still with the same thread of ideas, we tab it in one more time and italicize it, and so on. So this gives us a really nice example of what headings look like in the table of contents. Okay, and just to remember, super important, use Roman numerals for all the material before the content of the body of the dissertation, and then use numbers for the rest. Okay. So for the abstract, that comes next after the title page and the after the title page and talking about the whole outline of your dissertation, you want to begin this on a new page. And on the first line of the abstract page, center the word abstract, but don't bold it. This is in the very beginning of that page. And then beginning with the next line, write a concise summary of the key points of your research, and don't indent this paragraph like we normally do. Keep it flush left. And this should contain at least your research topic, the questions, your participants, your methods. Think of it as how you could quickly describe your dissertation to someone. You want it between 150 and 250 words, but the max is 350 words. Okay, we're going to jump to references for a second, and we'll go backwards from here. So we're going to jump to references for a moment. So when you're ready to do your references, for the title of the references section, you put the word references at the top of the page, centered and not bolded, just like with your abstract. And remember to keep all the references double spaced, and it's organized alphabetically by last name. And the first line of each reference is flush left, and the next lines in that same reference are always tabbed in one time. We'll see some examples coming up, and there's a lot of rules about the references, so this is a section to be really aware of. Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. So just looking at reference basics. So again, first thing is, this may be a review for some, but if not, that's great too. So first thing, it's going to be the last name, comma, the first initial of the first name, and sometimes the first initial of the middle name. So example, if my last name's Smith, comma, my first name's Carol, and my middle name is Harmony, that's how it would look. And then for the title, you only capitalize the first letter and the first letter of the subtitle. So we have an example right here. So I'm only capitalizing friendship. I'm not capitalizing anything else in the title. And then I want to italicize the journal and the journal number, but I want to not italicize the page numbers within that article. Okay? And there's a little note at the bottom that just underlines, let's see here, that just underlines specifics for specific references to look at page 193 in the publication manual, 6th edition, if you need to. So more reference basics. So all lines after the first line of each entry in your reference list should be indented 1/2 inch. We already said that, but just a quick review. Again, last name first, give the last name and initials for all the authors of a particular work for up to and including 7 authors. So if there's 7 authors, you need to go ahead and list all of them. If there's more than that, list the first 6 authors, and then you can use an ellipses after the 6th author's name. And then after the ellipses, list the last author's name. Let's say there's 15 people who wrote this. You don't need to write all 15, just those first 6, and then the last person. Reference list entries should be alphabetical, yep. And then for multiple articles by the same author, or authors listed in the same order, list the entries in chronological order, from earliest to most recent. Let's say you had a lot of articles by Dr. Roberts, and she wrote 7 different articles. So you want to do it by year, not by last name, because obviously those are the same last names. And again, write the journal title in full. Don't make it short in any way. Okay. Yes. And Purdue OWL, if you type that into Google, it's a huge, free, great resource. I'd highly recommend it. They have a whole APA how-to. They have great examples. They have great specifics on references, on insight quotations. A lot of this is from that website, and it's a great resource. At the end, I have the website link for you all, but if you just type in APA Purdue OWL, you will find a lot of things that are really helpful. And you want to maintain the punctuation capitalization that is used by the journal title in its title. For example, if the journal was Recall with a capital C-A-L-L, keep it like that. Keep the little e little. Don't mess with it in your references because you want to make sure people can find it easily. And you want to capitalize all major words in the journal titles. Yes, overall. And then when referring to books, chapters, articles, or web pages, capitalize only the first letter of the first word of a title and subtitle. And we said this again just to underline. And then the first word after colon or dash in the title and proper nouns. And then you want to italicize titles of longer works such as books and journals. And you do not italicize, underline, or put quotes around the titles of shorter works such as journal articles or essays or edited collections. In MLA format, you may be used to doing this, but you do not do that in APA. Okay. So, when creating a reference, you want to ask yourself these questions. So, what type of source is the article from? Are we looking at a book, a journal article, a web page? Because all of these have different requirements. Second question, can I get the APA reference from the online journal or from the source itself? For example, if you're looking on PsycInfo or another really good search engine through, let's say, My Alliance Library, often off to the right, if you go to Citation, they will have a pre-populated APA format citation for you. I would urge you to double check that it's done correctly, but it can save you a ton of time because often it's already pre-populated. And then mirror samples that you see on Purdue OWL APA format or in the 6th edition formatting APA book. Make sure, some professors are really sticklers on the reference list, so this is something, again, to really pay attention to. And make sure references are organized by last name, alphabetically, and that the subsequent lines of each reference are indented. Okay, so to help readers locate the cited source in your reference section, so whenever you use a source in your text, you have 2 options. So at the end of a quote or talking about that source in parentheses, you include, so now we're in in-text land, so we're no longer in the actual reference section. We're talking about when we're writing our actual paper. So again, you have a couple options here. So at the end of a quote, when you're talking about something, you can put in parentheses the last name, the year of publication, and the page number, if you know the page number. And here's an example. She stated, students often had difficulty using APA style, comma, here's the last name, the year, that quote was written, and the page number. There's an option number 2. You can also use the author's name when talking about a source and put the year in parentheses. And you can also put their name, year, and page number at the end of the summary. So in the first example, we see how you can do this right after the quotation in the middle of a sentence, and you can also, there's 2 different examples. In number 2, you can do, according to Jones, and then you put the year in parentheses, and then you go off to what Jones said, but this could be in quotes or not in quotes, or you say the whole thing that Jones talked about, then at the end of the sentence, you'll put the last name, year, and page number. So when quoting, you want to introduce the quote with a single phrase, include the author's name, year of publication, and page number if you have it. You won't always have the page number. And keep the citation brief and do not repeat information. Okay, and I'd say only quote when absolutely necessary. Yeah, so again, example, Jones, in quotes, in parentheses, 1998, found the students often had difficulty using APA style, and then I have that page number. Okay. So in text citations with single words, so introduce quotes with a single phrase. For example, according to Nielsen in 1999, comma, and then in quotes I have the quote, and at the end of the sentence I have the page number. So again, you can do this a couple different ways depending how it makes sense for you in the sentence. These are really good words, single words that you can use to introduce an author and a quote. You can use acknowledged, concluded, maintained, responded, contended, argued, reported, said, etc. Make sure to introduce your sentence with words like this. And remember to use verbs in the past tense for things that occurred in the past, and present if what you're talking about is still occurring. Pretty basic, but we forget this sometimes. Okay, and then for an in-text citation, when you're using two or more works, so again, when the parenthetical citation includes more than one author of different works, order them alphabetically by last name, and then author's name and year of publication need to be in there, and then they're separated by a semicolon. So we have an example right there. In this example, we have the author's first initial in there because they had the same last name. Typically, you wouldn't have the first initial before the last name, but this gives you a good example that if you had two authors, same last name, you could use their first initial if needed. Typically, you wouldn't see that. In-text citations works with 3 to 5 authors. So when citing a work with 3 to 5 authors, identify all authors in the single phrase or in the parentheses. So there's the example right there, Nielsen, Roberts, and Pierce in 2009. Notice the "and" there is not written out. It's the shorthand version because it's in the parentheses. And then in subsequent citations, only use the first author's name followed by et al., just like you see it there, ETAL dot, in the signal phrase or parentheses. So example, Nielsen et al., comma, 2009. So I only need to use those 3 authors written out completely one time in text. And then in-text citation with 6 or more authors. When citing a work of 6 or more authors, identify the first author's name followed by et al. So you never have to put all 6. You just start with that first author. And I had 2 different examples here for you. One would be at the end of a sentence, and one would be introducing the sentence. What if I have an unknown author? So use the source's full name in the signal phrase. So cite the first word of the title followed by the year of publication in parentheses. So according to, quote, BBC Brain Story, 2005. Or at the end of the sentence in parentheses, I would say BBC, comma, 2005. So again, according to the OWL website resource on APA citations, when your essay includes parenthetical citations of sources with no author named, use a shortened version of the source's title instead of an author's name, and use quotation marks and italics as appropriate. For example, parenthetical citations of the source Merriam-Webster's 1993. This is an example right here, Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary 10th edition, 1993, spring. So this is an example of how the reference would look in the reference section. The above example in parentheses is how it would look in text, and there should be a comma right after Webster's. Sorry about that. I don't know. Okay. In-text citation organization. So when citing an organization, mention the organization the first time you cite the source in the signal phrase or the parenthetical citation. So for example, the data collected by the Drug Administration, parentheses, 2013, confirm that ... And if the organization has a well-known abbreviation like the FDA, in the abbreviation, you can use parentheses after the first time you fully write it out, and then after that, you can just use the abbreviation. So again, in text citation, what if there's the same last name or author? This, again, like we said before, is when in the parentheses you use the first initial, period, their last name, comma, year, and then you use the first initial of the other author, period, just to differentiate the 2 authors. And when citing 2 or more works by the same author and that are also published in the same year, this is pretty rare, you're going to use lowercase letters after the year. So for, let's say Roberts wrote 4 articles in 2014, that's A, B, and C, and D. The first article in 2014 would have A after it. Again, this is pretty rare, but just in case you run into that. Okay, what if we're talking about a personal communication? So when citing things like interviews, letters, emails, you include the communicator's name, the fact that it was a personal communication, and the date of communication. You probably won't be using these, but just in case. Example, E. Lyon also claimed ... and then in the parentheses I would literally write personal communication, the date, and the year. Or E. Lyon, personal communication, November 3rd, 2005. Again, the only reason I would use the E. is if Lyon was an author that was 2 different people, if that makes sense. Okay. All right, and electronic resources. So when citing an electronic document, whenever possible, cite in the author date style. So if the electronic resource lacks page numbers, locate and identify paragraph numbers or paragraph headings. Just think, how could someone else find this if they were looking at my reference? So for example, according to Gardner in 2013, comma, ... and then in my parentheses, statistics 101 section, paragraph 5. That's what it's meaning. All right, now we're moving on into headings. I think this can be really helpful for your dissertation. So there is a whole system that APA uses for their headings. If you go back on the PowerPoint, and you will be able to do that later, you can see how in the very beginning, in the table of contents, it gives a good example too of how your headings can look throughout your dissertation. So again, how you start your dissertation is with a title that is centered, bold, uppercase and lowercase words, depending on which words you're using, but mostly it's uppercase words. Your next idea or your next section is left aligned and bold faced. Again, most of the words are uppercase letters. And then the next idea that is related to this left-aligned idea but is a new thought. So for example, if I'm talking about flowers and my first chapter is all about flowers, maybe the next indented is about red flowers. This is a very simple example, but it kind of makes sense as we flow. So if I'm talking, if my dissertation is about the best flowers in America, and then my left aligned is about flowers that everyone think are beautiful, and then my next idea is red flowers. That's our next first indented boldface lowercase heading with a period. So what I like about this example is it shows you and tells you at the exact same time what you're supposed to be doing. So it says indented, boldface, lowercase heading with a period. So the only thing that's uppercase is that the first letter of the first word of that new thought. Then let's say we're talking about flowers that everyone thought was beautiful, and now we're going to talk about flowers that everyone thinks that are beautiful and are the most popular. So we're still in the exact same idea, but it's a slightly new idea. This next part is indented and italicized and bold-faced. Then let's say we're still on the same thought, but a slightly new one. It's beautiful flowers that everyone thinks are the most popular and everyone wants to buy. Then this one is no longer bold-faced, but it's now italicized and indented. More typically than not, you'll probably have a lot of your different sections all left-aligned and bold-faced because they'll relate, but not enough to keep in the same flow. So this is a nice example of everything I just said that makes a lot more sense. So again, chapter 1 is centered, and it's all capitalized, and then next, title of chapter 1, we're still centered because this is the same part of that title. And next, we have that section heading for the first section, the left aligned, bold-faced. The next thought that is still within that first heading is just indented once, still bold-faced. The next one is indented and also italicized, and then the next is italicized but not bolded. And there's some nice APA comments on the side of this as well. Okay, so this is just continuing that paper to tell you. So if we, going back to the last one for a second, so if we still had a thought after this last one here where it's indented and not bolded but still italicized, if we still were in the same thread of thought here, the next one, the APA level 4 heading, would again be indented, bolded, and italicized. The next one would not be italicized but would be bolded. Then we're going to our next section. This is going to be left aligned, bold, okay? This can get a little confusing, but just come back to it and it's really helpful. Okay, moving on to tables for a moment. So you always want to label the tables with numbers. So you can see on the example it says table 1 and provide a title. So the title of this one is Dogs Scoring Above Average on Intelligence by Breed and Gender. And the label and title appear on separate lines, and they're both flush left and single space. And you want to cite a source in a note below the table. So you can see how it says note, period, average score equals 150, and then inserted immediately after, they are first mentioned in the text. So if I'm talking about how dogs are scoring above average on intelligence, I immediately want to use my table there. Sometimes tables take an entire page, and if so, that's okay, but make sure it's immediately after the text that's talking about it. And the table and figure heading should be both single-spaced. And figures, so label figures with numbers, and you want to provide a title. So the label and title appear on the same line below the figure, flush left. You might provide an additional title centered above the figure, that's optional, and you want to cite the source below the table and the title. So for example, this could be below a table or a figure, and it would say figure 1, internet users in Asia adapted from the Asian Union. So this is the source right below the table, and it should all be single spaced. Sorry, there's a little extra space there. Okay, so coming to the end of the presentation here, so most of you should know this, but one of the biggest resources to help you with your dissertation is the publication manual of the American Psych Association, the 6th edition. It has pretty much everything you could ever imagine. You have a question about for APA, it's a huge, really great resource. You can get it on Amazon. It's not very expensive, and if finances are at all a concern, most schools have this for free or with the library. I think there is even an online version, so that's a really great resource. Another even more accessible resource, which is free, is that first link right there, that Purdue Online Writing Lab. You can also just type in Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab, APA style, and it will review everything that I just went over and more. And also, we have through the Hawk Writing Center, on your Moodle page, if you go to Hawk Writing, we have a dissertation toolbox. This can also be found if you go to My Alliant and then click on Student, click on Hawk Tutoring Center, go to Writing Center, and then Dissertation Writing Assistance. We will have this video, we have lots of other videos, we have different outlines, we have different resources if you're writing a qualitative versus quantitative dissertation. We have a lot of different things that are helpful there. If you still have questions beyond the resources we have, please don't hesitate to email me or Richard. Richard's email is rgardner@alliant.edu, rgardner@alliant.edu. We also have an online tutoring center called BrainFuse, which you can also access through My Alliant, and this is online tutors that the university actually provides for us all. They can edit papers and also help with APA formatting, so that's also a resource that I would highly recommend you all use. You can also see a writing tutor, and you can email someone like me for appointments. There's other writing tutors as well to help with the APA formatting and things like that. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. I know it was a bit of a review, but I wanted to make sure it made sense for everyone. Good luck on your dissertations. I know it can be difficult, but keep chugging away at them. One day you will finish and you will be so proud of yourself. So thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.
A great big thank you. All right, so I think that about rounds it up. I want to, first of all, give a great big thank you to Emily. You did such a wonderful job. Yay!